Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it right away over to Cappy so that she can introduce herself and get her presentation going.
All right, thank you, Tanya. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I've looked at the work of the Trash the Runway students from previous years, and it's just incredible. So it's an honor to be able to talk with you all today. And I hope that we're inspiring some young people to use their wild creativity to create serious change. Um, I'd like to, well, first of all, my name is Kalliopi Monoyios. I'm an artist working to mature the conversation around plastic and plastic pollution. And if you look at my work today, you would maybe not realize that I actually have a background in science. And that's a huge part of why I've chosen to kind of communicate my work, and my cause the way that I do. So I'm going to share that journey with you, as well as a couple of other artists I think who are doing an incredible job using similar tools to achieve their own means with topics that they're passionate about. And yeah, without further ado, we'll just jump right in. As I mentioned, I didn't start as an artist. I always, oopsies, let's see, here we go. I was taught in elementary school, middle, high school, that art was a way to express yourself. And I didn't feel like there was anything very pressing that I needed to tell everyone about me. So it didn't sit well, even though I was very much drawn to the arts and always crafting in a corner, bringing, string bracelets to places to entertain myself, that kind of thing. But in terms of studying it as a serious discipline, it didn't occur to me. Instead, I studied science. And when I was geology specifically, when I was a senior in college, and everyone was looking for jobs at job fairs, surprise, surprise, there weren't so many people looking for museum staff, which is what I thought I was interested in doing. But luckily, I had an aunt who worked at the Field Museum of Natural History, and she invited me out for a week my senior year to just see what types of jobs were behind the scenes in museums. And when I got there, they were preparing Sue, which is the most complete T-Rex fossil ever discovered. I believe she's still on display at the Field Museum 20 years later, 25 years later. But at the time, they were just getting her ready for display. And so I got to go and touch her tooth. It was very exciting. And I had always been interested in fossils. So I figured, let's give this a try. Let's see. How does one get into fossils? Well, luckily I had a geology degree. And through various connections, I met up with Professor Neil Shubin, who was moving his paleontology lab from the University of Pennsylvania to the University of Chicago. And I linked up with him as a lab tech. The first year, I was just tasked with researching what it takes to set up a fossil lab. And so I spent a lot of time with fossil preparators. Those are people who dig and extract the fossils from the rock, grain by grain. This is Bob Masick, another preparator who was in the department at the University of Chicago. And, I learned from the best and created this fossil lab. A couple of years later, we recovered this beautiful fossil from the Arctic that would become known as Tiktaalik rosier. But this is a really special photo because this is the first time that anybody laid eyes on this for 375 million years. So the cool thing about fossil preparation was that it really felt like you were on the front line of knowledge. This is something that had been buried in rock for 375 million years. And as a fossil preparator, you were pulling away that rock and then getting to stare this ancient creature in the face for the first time. It was incredible. This is what, I actually didn't get to work on this exact specimen, but this is what that specimen looked like once all of the rock was removed. And it was an incredible experience. Fossil preparation is a really cool field. However, it's extremely taxing on your body. And what I discovered was I wasn't cut out for it. You sit in a chair, hunched over a microscope for hours and hours at a time, very carefully pulling away the rock from the fossil. And it was just back-breaking work, eye-breaking work, neck-breaking work. It was brutal. But while in the department, I learned of another discipline that's related, which is the next step in the scientific discovery process, and that is drawing the fossils. So once they are removed from the rock and photographed, then scientific illustrators come in and they draw the fossils, emphasizing certain parts that they're able to repair, parts that are broken, or combine images from multiple different specimens that might have various pieces missing, but together they make a whole. So this is what science illustrators do. And I was entranced with the gorgeous, gorgeous drawings that these people were producing, and I wanted to draw like them. So lucky enough, there was a science illustrator in the department who occasionally gave an advanced course for graduate students in science illustration. And she taught us how to measure the specimens. You take 1,000,000 measurements. This is the analog way of doing it. You take 1,000,000 measurements, and finally you come up with a line drawing, and then you start shading it in. And so I did this for a few years and created illustrations like this that all of 3 people saw, because there are 3 people in the world who are experts on this type of fish, and then everybody else is like, who cares? But it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And it was great art education on the job. That fossil that I showed you, the 375-million-year-old fish fossil, was actually quite a big find. And when we published the results in the scientific journal Nature, it made quite a splash. Ha ha ha. In fact, it's the only fossil that we have ever found that got on the front page of the New York Times above the fold, which might not mean anything to you digital youth, but for the old fogies in the audience, totally, I'm right there with you. Above the fold, there used to be these things called newspapers, and being above the fold, like, in other words, the thing that you would see on the newspaper stand in the grocery store or wherever, was a big deal. So we were very excited to get above the fold. We like to joke that April 6th, 2006 was a very slow news day because a fossil got on the front page, but it was a very cool fossil. And this is one of my all-time favorite illustrations that I did. This was a stipple drawing, which is a technique where you place thousands of little black dots on the page. And when you want it to be darker, you place them closer together, and lighter, you space them further apart. And it gives this appearance of a shaded drawing. This was the fin of Tiktaalik, which was the exciting part of the fish because it has the same structure in its fin. Or these bones are the same, follow the same pattern as the bones in our arms. So there's this cool parallel. This thing, the structure in our arms goes all the way back 375 million years before even fish had walked out onto land. So there was a big story here, and the professor I was working with wanted to tell it to a broader audience than the 100 people who were going to see his article, which is a lot, by the way. But obviously, compared to a country of 350 million people, it's not so many. Anyway, so he decided to write a popular nonfiction science book. And some of you maybe have taken AP biology. They often use this book in AP biology classes because it tells the history of why our bodies are the way they are. It's all contained in the record of evolution, and you can go back to 375 million years, even before then, to learn why are we bilaterally symmetrical, right? Why do we have this structure of bones in our arms and legs? All of that is contained in the story of evolution. So I illustrated this book that he wrote, and it was pretty successful. It's been translated into over 30 some languages. This is my collection of foreign language books. I don't have all 30, obviously, but I have some cool ones. If anyone can read Japanese, I'd love to know how the translation is. But it was the first time that I was actually thinking about creating images for a broader audience than scientific experts. So it's different different beast when you're thinking about talking to somebody who maybe doesn't even care about science. And that was a really fun exercise and a really challenging exercise. But it got the gears turning for me because I like to think I was creating an image that my dad could understand. My dad is super brilliant, but he is not a science person. And so I was like, how do I explain this to him when he doesn't want to take a full intro biology course and then an evolution course, et cetera, et cetera? He's got 30 seconds for me to tell him what's up and why this fossil is interesting. So this is the kind of filter that I pushed all of the illustrations through in this book, Your Inner Fish. And what I learned in this process was it's important to catch people where they are. And it doesn't matter if everybody gets the same thing from your art. If somebody walks away, if somebody absolutely hates science and they look at this for 2 seconds and they're like, I don't know, it's a bunch of animals. You're like, yes, great, it is. You're right, you got it. Did you notice anything else? Well, I don't know. There's like a fish or something and a person and a dog. Amazing. Yes, they're grouped together for a reason. Why? I don't know. I noticed that the fins and the front limbs were highlighted. Perfect. There's a relationship there, right? And so now I've gotten you to kind of engage a little bit further in the diagram. So that was a huge step in my thinking about how I wanted to communicate science and who I wanted to talk to. At the same time, I got invited to create a blog for Scientific American with another artist named Glendon Mello. And we were tasked with creating a blog that covered the intersection of science and art. It was called Symbiotic. It ran for 6 years. And I just had the best time discovering artists who were using science to propel their work forward. And likewise, there were scientists who were doing art that was inspired by their work. But the ones that really got me were the ones who were using science as fuel, as fodder, as material for their artwork. This is one of my all-time favorite artists, Adrienne Segal, and she's a furniture maker. A furniture maker? What does that have to do with science, right? Well, she has this brilliant relationship with data where she wants to make it intuitive for people who are not data people. So I don't know how many of you have had experience with big oceans and the coasts, but perhaps you've seen tide tables like this before. When you live on the coast or when you visit a beach, you need to know when the tides are going to be high, when they're going to be low. It affects everything from currents to how much beach there is to walk on. You can get stranded if you go out somewhere on low tide and then high tide comes in, you're toast, right? It's not to be messed with. You need to understand tide tables. If you look them up online, you'll often see them in this table format where you can see the time where the peak high tide is and the time where the low tide is. It's a very useful tool, right? But it's not intuitive. Like it doesn't tell you what does a month of tides look like, right? How does that data change? There are very few of us who can look at these numbers and say, oh yes, I see the pattern, right? Most of us look at that and we're like, there's a bunch of numbers. Snooze, right? Or you get the information that you want from it and then you move on. Adrienne Segal had this revelation that if you look at how those numbers are graphed, oftentimes you'll also, if you I pulled up a couple of apps for tidal data and it shows you this graph because that's another intuitive way to see, oh, high tide is right here at 4 o'clock. Low tide is, whatever time. What she did was she took those curves and she made each one of those into a cast iron rod. So each one of these waves in the table is one 24-hour cycle of tide data. And a lunar month is 28 days, right? So there are 28 of these showing an entire tide cycle over the course of a month in San Francisco Bay. She took data from NOAA that records these numbers, and she made it into this incredible intuitive piece of artwork. And what's interesting is if you go to her website, she says, and I'm quoting, Sculpture is an aesthetic language I use to bridge the gap between reason and emotion. My work explores ways to transcend the divide from objective scientific data towards that of experiential knowledge, honoring a more inclusive and expansive understanding of knowledge and how it can be communicated across generations. What I think is so incredible about this statement is that science is only a couple hundred years old. Now, don't get me wrong, I have a scientific background. I think science is the best way that we have to understand the world, but it's not accessible to everybody. And for millennia, humans have been knowing and moving through the world quite successfully using more intuitive ways of sensing and knowing the world, experiential knowledge. And that's what she's trying to get at. She's saying data's great, data's awesome, but there are a ton of people who will miss what a tide cycle is like if we just give them a box of numbers, right? I think this is brilliant. She's brilliant. All of her work is brilliant. You should go check her out. Um, Definitely check out her work because she does other stuff with like water usage in California, and it's really wonderful, her work. Another person that I saw or discovered while I was blogging for Scientific American is John Sabra. He's a professor of art at Ohio University, and he does these beautiful abstract paintings. You might look at this and think, oh, it kind of looks like a river. And that's not by accident. His work is deeply, deeply connected to rivers because he lives in Ohio, where there are a lot of mines that were plugged up, coal mines that were plugged up after they were abandoned in the 1800s, early 1900s, etc. And what happens with those abandoned mines is they fill with water, groundwater seeps in. And then the mines have sulfuric acid in them that dissolves into the water. And then, as groundwater does, it makes its way into streams and it causes the streams to die. What John Sabra did, which is so brilliant, is that he noticed that these streams were dead, but and they're really easy to spot because they turn fluorescent orange. It's kind of crazy. These pictures over on the left are the polluted streams you can see, and they turn this like crazy color orange and nothing lives in them because sulfuric acid is extremely acidic and nothing can grow. So they're easy to spot when you see a stream that's polluted. And it's easy to see where the water is seeping in because before the water seeps in, the stream looks normal. You can see up here in the top left, it's like, happy and green. And then suddenly the seepage comes and it turns fluorescent orange. Well, what he realized, being a painter, was that that orange material is just iron oxide. What happens is the sulfuric acid laden water dissolves iron oxide out of the rock as it makes its way into the stream. And that's why the streams are fluorescent orange. Okay, what's iron oxide? Sounds like a chemical, right? I don't know. What is that? Well, he's a painter and he knew that iron oxide is responsible. It's a natural pigment and it's responsible for a huge number of colors in paints that you buy at the art store, from yellow to brown to black to red and orange, this whole range of colors. And so he began to work with some professors. I believe they were engineering professors at Ohio University, and to make this system that would pull out that iron oxide at the same time that it was making the stream habitable again for fish. So this is a picture from his website, and I highly recommend going to his website and checking out all of his research and the whole process. It's really fascinating. But here you can see he's knee deep in this sulfuric acid water. They collect all of this sediment that's rich in the iron oxide deposits, and they are refining it into paints. This is some of the paint or some of the pigment that they dried from a place called Sulphur Springs Hollow in Ohio. And what they ended up doing is turning this into pigments that they could then sell to companies like Gamblin, which is a very popular paint artist paint company. The idea being that they could ultimately fund the reclamation of these streams that are so polluted with the sale of paints that are directly related to the reclaiming of the streams. Super brilliant, so cool. I highly recommend checking out his work. And then, of course, obviously buying his paints if you're a painter. So we have a furniture maker who's kind of drawing attention to how people can be more in tune with their surroundings, right? Through tidal data, water consumption, etc. We have a painter who is figuring out how to reclaim streams that are highly polluted and toxic, and fund it through the sale of paints. And then, of course, he uses those pigments in his own work. And then another person I was always really inspired by is Courtney Madison. She's a sculptor, a ceramic artist, and her passion is climate change and the acidification and warming of oceans as a result. And she makes these huge installations of coral reefs that are bleaching. If you haven't heard about coral bleaching, it's a process that happens when the coral expels the symbiotic algae that lives in it, and then it dies off. And it does this when it's too hot. And as oceans warm due to climate change, this is happening more and more. And the reefs are a huge source of diversity and health for our oceans. And so it's kind of distressing, right? Well, she makes these incredible installations that draw attention to that. But to give you a sense of the scale, that's her with one of her installations. These things cover huge walls, and she's gotten wonderful exposure and commissions in Indonesian embassies and on National Geographic boats and et cetera, et cetera. She's really a successful artist. And so it's cool to see her passion for ocean conservation fueling her work. So as you can imagine, these people really inspired me, and they got the gears turning for me to think about what perspective I had to share. What was I able to draw attention to, and what was my passion? So around that time, I got a compost bin from the city, and that allows me to put any organic matter that would normally go into the trash into the compost, including bones, including grains, et cetera, et cetera. And what I realized was when you do that, the only thing left in our trash was plastic packaging, which totally surprised me because I thought I was being careful. But I was to learn that all of us are a part of this process and this system of single-use plastic. So it was kind of maybe around Halloween time, and I was curious. The science illustrator in me wanted a way that would show how much plastic we throw away that would be impressive. It's light. So like plastic is really light, so it wouldn't be impressive to weigh it. And it's compact, like you can smush it up into a very small ball, and it's not very impressive in that realm. But the area I thought might be something interesting. And so I grabbed some Halloween candy and sat down at the kitchen counter and with a razor blade and sliced out each piece and flattened the wrappers and came up with this. This was one basket of Halloween candy that I laid out just to see how big it was. And it turned out to be 4 feet by 3 feet. I thought, that's pretty impressive for one bag of candy. I made this hideous quilt, which has never gone on display, but I like to show it to students because it's important that you know that you will have ugly ideas and you will make ugly art. And that's okay. That's part of the process. So here you go. Here's my ugly art. So, but really it was a test to see like how much area was it impressive, the amount of area I could produce. And I thought, yeah, this is cool. This has promise. Another little silly experiment I did that never sees the light of day, but I'm showing you guys now, is I collected all the little plastic produce tags off of my family's produce for an entire year, and it covered this box. I thought that was kind of cool. Um, but again, just the very inklings and beginnings of a body of work, very small, thin idea, not developed. Next, I went to Greece with my family in 2018, and I had been visiting there quite many times to visit family, and had always gone exploring on the beaches. They have such a cool diversity of beaches there: pebble beaches, sand beaches, rock beaches, and happened to be on this island these gorgeous rock formations, which as a geologist I couldn't help but explore. And then I looked down and there was this crazy, colorful confetti everywhere. And it was tiny pieces of plastic. Some of them, as you can see in the top right corner, were quite worn. They had been around for quite a while. And this just blew my mind. I had not ever experienced something like this. I hadn't been on a beach vacation in maybe 20 years, and I hadn't been to Greece, since I was maybe a very young adult. And so it was so strange. Like, it used to be a big deal if you found a flip flop or a buoy. And here the beach was just covered. So I did what any sane person would do. Just kidding, not so normal behavior. But I went and bought a sieve from the grocery store, and I sat in the shade in the beach and sifted out all of the plastic debris that I could find in kind of a 2-foot square radius or area. And it was crazy. I couldn't believe how much plastic was mixed in with the sand. It started me on this kind of plastic safari where I was like, oh wow, lots of things that we use are plastic, so I guess it doesn't surprise me that there's all this junk on the beach. There's the obvious things like milk cartons and water bottles and perler beads, etc. But there are some things that are not so obvious, like the filling in your pillows. Like, I guess obviously if you look at the label, it says polyester, and polyester is plastic, but did you think of that as a plastic item in your house? Probably not, right? Likewise, the jersey is nylon and maybe acrylic. Of course that nylon and acrylic are plastic, but it never occurred to me that, wow, no, actually all of these materials in our house are plastic. Likewise, I went deeper in my plastic exploration and discovered, of course, like, erasers are plastic, gum is plastic, the latex paint on our walls is plastic, vinyl stickers, vinyl shower curtains, pleather, you name it, it's all plastic. Glue. And for my and then of course, even more hidden are things like stain treatments and waterproofing. The insides of ketchup bottles are lined with Teflon to make it slide down the sides easier. When I was a kid, there used to be a commercial for Heinz ketchup that was "Good things come to those who wait," because it talked about how when you turn the ketchup upside down, it took forever for it to slide down. Well, they figured out how to fix that. They just put Teflon on the inside and it slides down no problem. But Teflon is even plastic. I didn't know that. And just as an aside, dental floss, which would become a favorite art material for me, but we'll get there. I mentioned that I was a geology major, and what I realized was that when you take Geology 101, you learn that the forces of erosion, wind, water, and chemicals, break down the rock that's existing out there. Whenever it rains, when the wind blows, they slowly, grain by grain, molecule by molecule, they break down the rock and they carry it down in these river systems and then out onto beaches and deltas. And that's just the way that the Earth's surface is shaped. Well, what happens when you throw a bunch of plastic into it? It's going to do the same thing. What I realized is we're living in the Plasticine, and the stuff that we put in the environment gets munched down into sand, basically, plastic sand. So this was a big realization for me. And I realized that that was kind of the nugget, the unique perspective that I could share with people. This combination of a geological background and a view that was shaped by my knowledge of the history of Earth and how the Earth is shaped and formed. Combine that with this observation that we are putting a whole lot of plastic into the environment. I did a little more research and I found that the kinds of images that are used to depict this plastic pollution problem are pretty gross. Typically, you see stuff like this and you're like, holy cow, that is so gross and so depressing, right? And, or like this is a pile of styrofoam collected by a recycling company that I've actually done a lot of really great work with. But this kind of stuff, it's like super depressing, right? You see these giant piles of trash and you think, oh, um, here's another example. This was Marcus Erickson is a professor, and he came actually in 2020 to give a talk at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And this glob of plastic that he's holding is the stomach contents of a camel that died in the desert, starved because the plastic bags that it had munched off of various trees and bushes had eventually clogged its stomach so that it couldn't get enough food to eat. It's like crazy stories, right? And super sad. But I don't know about you, but these kinds of things actually put me back a step because I feel so awful and so out of control. How can I help those camels in the desert not eat those plastic bags? I can't. Save uprooting my entire life and going to the desert and like pulling bags out of trees. Like that's not realistic, right? So instead, I kind of dug deep and I was like, okay, what is the motivating force for me tackling these problems in the first place? And it's love and respect and wonder for this incredible universe that we live in, and more importantly, this incredible planet that we live on. That is my motivating force. And I think that when we lead from there and we activate that, it gets like a mama bear, maybe parent bear, or maybe you don't have kids, like a protective instinct. This thing that we have here is so special and we should work to maintain it, right? That is what I want to activate. So when faced with all of this plastic in the world, I thought, how can I get back to this place of wonder? And then it hit me. Actually, that's pretty incredible. Plastic is a really amazing material that we've invented, right? Look at all of the different things that it does, all of these different forms it takes. It can be sticky, it can be flat, it can be hard, it can be soft, it can be, water resistant. It does all these things so well. It's a pretty incredible material. So I decided to lead with that, and I thought the plastic pollution problem could could follow. That we didn't have to harp on that. So I started creating. Things that I thought were beautiful from materials that people threw away. So this is a quilt that I created in 2020. And the idea here was to emphasize the colors and the shapes more than the actual materials like that it came from. So I wanted to cut up, these are food bags. You can see like Angel Soft toilet paper and tortilla chips and stuff. I wanted to, Amazon Prime packages, of course, all of these plastics that we use once and throw away. I thought maybe since quilts used to be made from the scraps of our lives, maybe we shouldn't cut up brand new pieces of fabric to make quilts. Maybe we should make them out of the actual scraps that we produce, which are single-use plastic. So there's one. I also took them and began folding them into modular origami pieces with the idea that folding 1,000 modular origami pieces is very meditative. And oftentimes people use meditation with a mantra to focus on something that they want to change, or that they want, to put their energy towards. So this was another sculpture series that I did. And then I also wanted to point out that plastic is so much more than bags and straws. So I started to look at some of the weird, counterintuitive materials that are plastic as well. And some of them are super helpful, like contact lenses. I adore my contact lenses. I wear them every day of my life, and I don't want to give them up. So that's okay. This is a little series I did of contact lens spheres. You can put a couple contact lenses together and make these gorgeous little blue spheres. And then I told you already, dental floss is one of my favorite materials. This particular brand of dental floss happens to be Teflon, which is one of the most environmentally persistent materials that we've ever made. It's extremely useful industrially because it's like stain resistant, resistant, corrosion resistant, et cetera, et cetera. They use it to line containers that hold really caustic materials, blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of really great industrial uses. Questionable whether it's a good idea to use it to floss your teeth for 20 seconds and then throw it in a landfill forever. Just saying. Gum is another one that I never really thought of as plastic, but it's plastic, people. And so I thought that was kind of a hilarious thing to point out. Side note, this is one of the smallest pieces I've ever made. It's 6 by 10 inches, but one of the most onerous to complete because chewing that much gum is disgusting. So just saying. Even when I've tried to drive home a larger point about our use, this, for example, is a piece I call Year of Plastic Family of Four, where a friend of mine actually collected the plastic from her family for an entire year. And she sent it to me in month installments. Each one of these banners is a full month of her family's plastic. And I wanted to put it together into this kind of crazy quilt that was visually appealing, right? I didn't want to make it feel like somebody's trash. And I did that very intentionally, even though I wanted the impact of the piece to be big. I wanted you to feel how much plastic they used in a year. But I also wanted it to be beautiful and fun because I didn't want to lead with that guilt, right? I wanted to lead with, holy cow, look at how much plastic is in our lives. That's what I wanted people to see. So I mentioned a little earlier, I've been working with this recycling company. I don't know if they have it up in Boulder, but certainly in Denver, this company called Ridwell, they collect hard to recycle items from your doorstep. And cords is one of the things they collect. And this is just a fraction of the cords that they pull in when they do a cord collection. You wouldn't believe it. But I think that it's a really interesting material because as I've gotten more into the plastic exploration and our patterns of consumption, how much we use, what I've realized is so much of it is driven by what you've maybe heard of as termed as planned obsolescence. So when you get your phone, right, it's only supposed to be good for a couple of years. And I broke my screen recently and I brought it in to get fixed. And they said, well, why don't you just look at these new phones? It was like my phone was 2 years old at that point. Why don't you just look at these new phones and see if anything appeals? I was like, I don't want a new phone. This phone is perfectly good. Replace the screen, right? But it's that planned obsolescence. They think this is going to last approximately 2 years and then they want you to upgrade. And that's how they keep the money flowing, right? But does it serve the environment, right? And do you actually need the new thing? Probably not. So this has inspired, and so the cords are emblematic of that to me, because when you get a new phone, guess what? Oh, the jack for your old headphones doesn't work, or your Bluetooth aren't compatible anymore, and the charger ports have changed, and this and that, whatever. So not only do you get a new phone, you get all the new chargers and whatnot that go with it. So I've created these sculptures out of those cords. So this is called landlines, and it's made out of discarded telephone and stereo wires. And and they're coated. I've wrapped them in Teflon tape. And the reason why I did this was because I'm thinking, every single one of those cords in those bins works. It's just that the technology companies have moved on, and then they've made those cords obsolete, and everybody follows like, oh, I want the next thing, right? So they dump the old cords that actually still work, and then they get their new thing. Well, my idea with these was, what if we restored their dignity? We kind of, these cords, like, they lubricate our lives, they connect us to loved ones overseas, they connect us to school, to opportunities, to talks like this, right? They're incredibly enriching tools that we just throw away when the next new thing comes along. So my idea here was to put them back on a pedestal, restore their dignity, make them into a beautiful piece of art that we could appreciate and say, thank you for connecting me all those years to people across the country or across oceans, or to music that, accompanied me when I was happy or sad, or, whatever, getting psyched or whatever. So that's kind of a series that I've developed along those lines. And then maybe more interesting to you guys with Trash the Runway are a series of wearables that I've become interested in. And the reason why I thought about making wearables was because I thought, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if we had to carry around all of the waste that we produced? Would we produce as much? And so I thought, well, a natural way to carry around the waste that we produce is to wear it, right? So this is a jacket that I made with 172 single-use food bags, plastic bags. And the necklace is dental floss. And I'll show you that in a second. But funny thing, if you guys, I don't know who photographs your shows, but I made this without knowing what the runway would look like and what the event space would look like. And I thought, oh, it'd be great. So she'll walk down like this, and then she'll turn around and the judges will see the back of the jacket, and then I'm going to win. And this was my thought. And I ended up getting third place. So I was really psyched out of 35 designers. But funny enough, I didn't get any pictures of the back of the jacket because it's really hard to photograph a fashion show. And so the photographers there were working their behinds off to get all of the models and all of the looks. They were not looking at them. Once a model turned around, they did not photograph that model anymore. So I had to get these other photographs taken in a studio here, actually with this guy, John Christopher Studio. So anyway, I got the back of the jacket. Phew. But the idea behind this jacket is, so 172 bags and this banner, one way, taken obviously from a street sign, One Way Street. And that is the title of the piece. And the idea is that it's really gorgeous and luxurious and kind of seductive. But at the end, you can kind of see the hem begins to get ragged. And actually at the very end of the 6-foot train, it devolves into tatters. And the idea there is that whether we use plastic for 3 seconds or 3 years, it's all a one-way street to trash. It all ends up as trash. So again, this idea of if we had to carry it around and make a bigger commitment than just 30 seconds, would we use as much? Another piece that I've made in this series is called The Weight of Our Possessions. I think actually the whole series is called The Weight of Our Possessions. This is a key collar. It's incredibly heavy. It's made from discarded keys, old abandoned keys. And the idea there is that the keys are emblematic of all we hold dear. We use keys to lock up the things that are most precious to us. And with the idea that Americans have a hilarious number of storage lockers of stuff that I don't know if we actually use it, but that's a great business to be in, is the storage locker business. And I just wonder how much of that stuff actually is needed or gets used. So this key collar is intentionally super heavy around the neck and uncomfortable to wear. And the question is, do we need all this stuff that we carry around with us? Another piece that I created actually for as an accessory for the jacket was made out of 299 single-use eyedroppers. And for those preservative-free eye drops that some people need for medical reasons. You know, again, just to see how like these little daily decisions add up. And yeah. So I hope that these kind of examples of my work and these other artists that I highlighted show you how, you know, art doesn't have to be about self-expression. It can have these deeper ideals and reasons for motivating and getting people to feel and move and do things. So I am wishing you all the very, very best of luck in the Trash the Runway competition. And I can't wait to see what you come up with. I know it will be incredible because I've seen pictures. Just quickly, I'm going to say I am actually participating in the really cool fashion show called Green is the New Black in Carbondale, Colorado, March 7th to 9th. So if you can get up there, it's 3 nights. And all of the works there have to be sustainable. So it's going to be really cool. I'll have 4 pieces in it. And then, I don't know, nobody's really going to be in Toronto, but I'm excited. In January, coming up a little sooner, I have some new works going into a solo show in Toronto. So, yeah, that's all. Did we want to take questions, Tanya, or?
Sure, I would love it if anybody had questions. Just unmute yourself or put it in the chat, whichever you prefer. If doesn't look like we're getting any questions.
All good. Then I will just use this opportunity to say, if anybody
Actually,
wants to help me
Chris,
collect plastic, that is something that I do. And you can go to this QR code and you can see the kinds of things that I'm collecting at the moment. Some of them are short term and some of them are long term projects. So please feel free to hit me up. Or if you have like a collection of weird plastic that you want used, then I'm game. So you can get in touch.
Christina, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question or a comment?
It's not my mom, it's just me. I
Just
actually that I was wondering how long did it take her to make all of her art pieces?
They vary considerably. So the quilted jacket here, we got our model measurements at the end of February. So I spent March and April working on it. And I would estimate, it's really hard. One of the things about an art job is that if you say, I spent 20 hours a week on it, people say, you only work 20 hours a week? No, the other 20 plus, or probably 40 hours are done, used to do publicity and getting your website up to date and financials and stuff like that. So, but I would say probably at least 20 hours a week for 2 months. And so, because each of these, so I had to make the fabric out of the plastic. So, so I was cutting strips of black and silver plastic, taping them together to hold them in place, then sewing them together, then sewing them onto the polyester lining fabric that makes up you can see in this picture. I got some, actually, you guys are in Boulder. There's a great store called Art Parts. Do you know it? That
They're a
place is
supporter
awesome.
of Trash the Runway.
Are they? Okay, awesome. That makes sense. There's an equivalent down here in Denver called Recreative, and that's where I got this fabric. Um, but so I would sew the quilted plastic onto the fabric, and then I would cut the pieces um, into the jacket. So I had to both make the fabric and then make the jacket. And I was using a pattern for the top part of the jacket, but I had to make up the bottom. So that was a lot of sitting and scratching my head and thinking, how's this going to work? Um, but yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is very, very labor intensive, and that's kind of part of the point, right? We've traded a lot of convenience for mass manufactured, a lot of mass manufactured items. Like cheap clothes are mass manufactured. You can't have, it used to be that people had one or two dresses, and like one fancy one that they would wear on Sunday to church, and then one that they would wear every day, right? And they would wash it once a month, right? Like we've traded whole wardrobes of fast fashion. My question is, maybe it makes more sense to invest in slower things, slower arts. So my work is intentionally very labor intensive.
Amazing. I just love the way you phrase everything. It's just, and the jacket is exactly what the kids have to do. They have to use their chosen material and then figure out how to make it into a bigger material. And I like how you manipulate it so that from far away or even up close, it's hard to tell what exactly it is. It's not just sewn together.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That is a requirement for my work that I've self-imposed. And that is, it has to be transformative. So you have to be able to step back and lose what it is, because I want people to reconnect with this idea like, holy cow, plastic, that's plastic. And maybe they'll connect the dots and say, plastic is crazy useful. Look at all of this stuff that we throw away. You could actually make it into garments that are wearable, right? You could actually make it. People have asked me, would you make tents for unsheltered people? Like, that's a cool idea. Yeah, maybe, right? We're not using this material to its full potential, and that's what I want people to get from the like removing the idea that it's trash from the front of their minds. They can think about it in a different way.
I see somebody else unmuted themselves. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I actually did. I was wondering, what is the hardest material that you've worked with so far, or heard that's really difficult to sew or weave?
So this quilt broke my favorite sewing machine. I learned that the hard way. It was, if you've ever gotten sausages from the supermarket that have a stiff plastic back and then the clear, like the stiff plastic back is often black, and then there's like a clear vacuum sealed piece over top. That stupid black plastic broke my favorite sewing machine, and I'm still bitter about it. So that.
Huh. Interesting. I
So
did not
be
know that.
careful.
We've not had a plastic yet that's broken our machine, so I'm hoping that's not going to happen.
I hope so too, because it was the saddest day. I had such a cool machine. But I guess the other thing I would say is this, and you wouldn't think that gum would be so challenging, but really it's just gross to chew that much gum. So I would say this gum. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Is there anything else? Nah, the other stuff is like pretty fun and easy. This is cool. So this is like the black cuff that's on my other hand. That's like an old television cord. That one was fun to sew. it's so weird because this material you would think is as thick as that dumb sausage wrapper, but that didn't break my machine. I don't know. Something about the sausage wrapper just got it.
Yeah, because we've done like inner tubes and
Yeah.
wires and stuff like that.
It's probably that it probably wasn't the sausage wrapper. It was just probably the machine was a hand-me-down from my aunt from the 60s. And it was a really cool machine, but I used it in ways that maybe it shouldn't be used.
Yeah.
So
I have
maybe
a
it's
Yes,
question.
our sewing machines do that too. Yes. There's a person named iPad that unmuted
Oh,
themselves. Do you have a
sorry.
question?
It's Missy Harper and Hattie. I was just
Oh,
curious about
hi.
that bracelet. Is it multiple cords or is it one that you spliced open? How did you do that? It's super cool.
sorry, the cuff, the black cuff or
Yeah,
the
the cuff.
yeah, it's 4 cords that I sewed together on their edges
Okay.
with a zigzag stitch.
I don't remember cords being smooth like that. Anyway, it's
I
very
know, it was a really weird one. So the fun thing about Ridwell is that you get the craziest cords. Like
cool.
there are some wacky cords that people throw away and you're like, what was this for? But you can see like here, you probably can't see my cursor, but there's like
We can.
in some of the boxes there's some flat cords and some, just weird stuff shows up.
I should contact Ridwell and see if they would do like some kind of a thing with us.
Yes, I'm sure they would. They're if you give them enough time, they only collect things that they can find homes for. So, and artists are on their list of things that they can find homes for. But you have to be prepared to get a scary amount of stuff.
That's always the issue. We don't have space.
Yeah, so that's the only reason why it's maybe challenging to work with them, because if you say I want a special collection of bottle caps or something, then you might get bottle caps.
Yeah. I was thinking more like that the kids could come to their facility and go, we'd like some of this and some of this or something like that, like more of a
That
random.
yeah, in my experience, they're very open to that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, because they don't care, like they just want to have the stuff find a good home.
Right. That's really cool. Anybody else have any questions? I love these questions that have come in.
Yeah, it's fun to talk to creative crowds. I really enjoy it.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for coming and thank you so much to Cappy for doing this. This has been amazing. And I can't wait to share it around. We're trying to figure out how to get this out to lots of people who weren't able to come tonight, and just share all this amazing wealth of information that you've put together.
Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful. I can't wait to see what your students come up with. I'm
Yes,
sure
hopefully
it'll
you'll
be
come to the
inspiring.
show.
Pardon?
Hopefully you'll come to the show.
Yeah, when is the show?
February 29th.
Okay.
It's on a Thursday night.
All right, cool. All right, send me
All
the
right.
info.
I sure will. Well, thank you, everybody. And have a good weekend. And those of you who are in Trash the Runway, I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Connie, was there anything else that we need to do?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. I hope that people enjoyed it. And
Yeah, there were some good kids in there that I recognized. So hopefully we'll
Nice.
get some more and